All right. Hey, Rob, what do you have there?
Hey Dave, I've got a capital from the Ionic columns that I've been working on. The capital had three flowers on the three exposed faces, and those flowers I've removed. Two of them are broken. I've had to carve new ones, and the voids where they mounted the flowers had really kind of rotted out from the inside. I think water was getting in there, and then doing some damage to the wood. Another thing is that on this particular capital, they had nailed the flowers in place through the top, so that created a hole in the top of the capital. So basically what I've done is I have put patches in to replace the wood that's compromised, to try to shore it up. And the next step is going to be to flatten these down to the same plane as the top of the capital, and then carve out the two on the side so that it will match that carved profile.
That is way cool. The one that's facing me
Yep.
seems to have a round hole in it.
Sure.
Did the flowers have pegs on them?
Yep, the flowers had pegs in
Was
the
that
back.
peg driven into the flower, or was it carved out of the flower?
The flower was carved out of the same piece of wood as the peg. So they basically rounded out the back of the flower.
All in
I don't
one-
know the order that they worked things in.
Well, they didn't have exterior glue, so the idea of gluing something in, which is what we might do today to save the trouble of carving something round,
Sure.
but they didn't have a glue that really held up outside.
Yeah.
And so they didn't have a glue, and so therefore when it came time to snug that in, they drove in a nail. They even might have been better off driving in a wooden peg, because at least it wouldn't have rusted and let water in.
Sure. Now I will say, I believe this is the one. There are two of these capitals that I'm working on. Both of them were nailed a little bit differently. I believe on this one they actually only nailed through the top of the forward-facing flower. Now the grain on this top piece runs this way, and so what they did on the two side flowers was they actually took a long nail and they drove it through the face of the flower and into the back of the actual hole. So these didn't have the same kind of rot as what you saw in the one in front. The two on the side here actually had rot that started down near the flower and had split the grain apart.
From snow laying on them and melting all of these years, of water splashing off the top of the flower?
Sure. Yeah, and the flowers were tight enough to be able to trap ice and anything in there.
Wow, that's so cool. What a funny thing. So here's the thing, I guess, that you always have to be thinking about. I think I can see what you've done here. Those patches are all pieces of wood, and the grain in the patches all seems to run as left to right.
I run the patches with the grain running in the same direction as the grain on the workpiece.
And because it's important to keep all of the grain running in the same direction, it increases the durability. The coming and going, that everything is coming and going in the same manner, so your
Sure.
glue joints aren't going to be cracking because of the climatic changes in the wood.
Yeah. So
What kind
if
of
we
glue
wanna-
did
if
you
we want to
use?
call that durability. The wood, through changes in humidity, tends to grow across the grain. Tends to move in that direction. It doesn't tend to grow with the grain. And so when you have a piece that's only moving in one direction based on the humidity or to some extent the temperature, then you need to have the grain on any patches run the same way. That way they're not fighting against each other.
Why do they stick up so far?
I cut these patches. I mean, I knew that I was going to have to carve them out anyhow. So the one in front, I basically just made the patch, cut the mortise for where the patch was going to land, and then clamped it in. The ones on the side, I have them actually angled like a keystone, and when you're trying to get a really tight fit, it's hard to be able to evaluate. It's hard for me to be able to evaluate ahead of time how far it's going to go, because you dry fit it and then you may have to remove a little more material from the workpiece. You might have to remove a little more material from from the patch itself. So I tend to err on the side of I'd rather have the piece too big than too small once it's set in place.
What are you going to do now? They stick up so far. You're going to sand all of that?
Nope, I'll just rough this out. I'll use a chisel and a mallet to bring them down close to the surface, and then at that point I can use a finer chisel or a hand plane. With side patches, I angled them kind of up a little bit when it comes to the grain. I don't know if you can tell in the video. What I want to be doing with these side patches is I want to be working from the center out, and I don't want to have the grain unexpectedly dive down below the surface that I'm trying to work. So for this one I'll be working out this way. On this one I'll be working out from the center that way.
Well, I'm sure I'm speaking for many people. I'd like to see that happen.
All right, let's go.
All right.
Now again, I did the best I could at angling the grain up. I don't know what the video catches. This piece of pine, it's got a pretty wide grain. It's not like old growth tight grain pine, so it still has a certain element of I'm being very cautious not to take too big of a bite off. I did the best I could at predicting the grain, but with pine, you know, it's never a guarantee with any wood.
The top that those pieces are glued into is probably also pine, isn't it?
Yes. Yep.
So it doesn't seem like there's anything inherently wrong with using pine and decorative elements that you put to the weather, as long as you keep them painted?
Well, this has survived over 200 years, 210 years or so. So I don't see that that's a problem. I know that right now a lot of plastic products are being marketed because plastic supposedly lasts longer, according to what a lot of people say. I'm not convinced of that. We're seeing a lot of mid-century furniture that was made with plastics and epoxies, and those are museums are having trouble preserving those because they haven't lasted so long. So yeah, I mean, I like pine a lot. I think that if you're being careful to prime it and keep it regularly maintained, obviously it will last quite a long time.
So the trick here is to chisel that down to as close as you dare to the surface of the wood. You're holding the chisel with the bevel down so that it won't dig in?
I'm hoping that it will yes, dive upwards rather than down.
If the bevel steers it in any direction, it will steer it out of the cut rather than deeper.
Yes, and I am actually putting a little bit of downward pressure, as I bite into the wood. I am kind of intentionally trying to move the chisel so that it will come up out of the piece. So.
That was a nice one. Little hint from your Uncle Dave at this point might be to just try to take a third of that off with the chisel, rather than use the whole of the 2-inch chisel in the block. Just take a third of it with the corner of the chisel.
You're saying?
Yeah, like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, take a piece. There you go. In reference to the side.
Yep, the grain is behaving predictably, which
That's-
is a good thing.
That's really nice. Maybe pat on the back for that one. And so now we'll pass on this side. And then it's nice to have a big chisel so that you can make something flat. Obviously, if you had a 1/4 inch wide chisel, you'd never be able to get that flat. You'd have all kinds of little lines. But when you're trying to do a little bit of tight handwork, using a little bit less of the tool sometimes is good. Well, it looks like you're
How do you feel about starting to reverse the chisel and try to...
never would do that.
You would not. Okay, why is that?
Because you've got too much invested in it right now. And I know the grain's running well, but no, I would never do that.
Okay.
The other thing is, I'm kind of chary about putting abrasive contact to the back edge of a chisel. You know, my theory about chisels is there's a ground side and a flat side. And the ground side has a bevel in it, and it can be, you know, depending if you're a purist or not, it can be a multitude of different angles or close to 30 degrees or 32 or whatever the number might be that makes you comfortable. But the flat side is flat. And,
Sure.
and if you rub that across the surface of the paint on a regular basis, you will start to round it.
Because pretty much all paint has ground titanium or other metals in it that...
All the paints that I've ever used that were white in nature have ground up bits of marble in them.
Okay.
Calcium carbonate. And it's not very hard. It's not as hard as steel, but over time it causes wear. Yeah, so I'm always concerned. Plus, I don't see any reason to encourage the thing to bite in. If you should, you will always be better off learning the technique of surfacing with a chisel using your eye and your hand than being lucky by putting it down on the flat and using the surface that's there to guide you.
Sure.
You're the way a
So I
craftsman.
guess you're right. I was thinking of laying it the other way as kind of a shortcut to getting it flat. You know, intuitively it seems like it...
It's precisely.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yep.
As a woodworking craftsman, as any kind of craftsman, is always honing their skills. Always honing their skills. Not testing yourself, but honing your skills. Your skill set is something that you develop over time and then maintain. There are no tricks. You're always better off practicing planing flat than depending on some tool that you've got to do it automatically. That's the difference between a craftsman and a mechanic.
That's as comfortable as that's about as far as I can go comfortably with this chisel. Now, talking about not damaging a tool with the different solids that they put in primers and paints, you just handed me a really nice block plane.
What are you going to do?
Sure.
This
So
is it.
just run it flat?
A block of wood with a piece of sandpaper taped to it.
It's not going to have the same finish.
Don't
as-
spend the day.
Sure.
You know, get it done. Don't plane any wood, you know, and every time you plane something that's actually got paint in it, you kind of curse under your breath. But that's the tool. It's not the chisel.
Sure.
And we sharpen it and, you know, end up having to get a new blade. There it is.
That is, you know, that's about as good as it's going to get unless I really try to take more material off. I feel just a little bit of an edge
Sure.
right here, and I see a spot where the glue is not gone, but I think that can be solved with some sandpaper if I feel like
All right.
I need to. So the next step on this, I'm going to flatten the other two, and then I've got to get the carving knives out and actually carve the two sides to the same shape as the rest of it.
All right. Well, you going to show us, do another one for us?
Sure.
Maybe swing that around so it's even a little bit easier for you to avoid the clamp. It's funny how a fresh piece of wood sort of looks a little bit out of place on something with as much wear in it as the top of that Capital.
Sure.
I guess that's the place for maybe a little bit of, as you say, a little bit of touch-up sanding at the end to sort of, not so much infer wear, but to take the edges off.
Well, I mean, I think that with this project, my goal is not to create Disneyland. I don't want to fake everything to make it look original, but I think using some 80 grit sandpaper adds a little bit of texture. Honestly, and maybe this is cheating, Dave, there's been a few things that I have used
A wire brush.
a wire brush on to try to exaggerate some of the newer grain and make it sort of hide a little bit in the old work. I don't know, what's your feelings on using a wire brush for that sort of task?
I like it because one of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want your new work to make the old work look shabby.
Sure.
Because your client wants something to look good. He's going to be someday proud greeting someone at his front doorway.
Yeah.
You give him something to be proud about, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I like it. All right. Can't wait to see you doing some carving as soon as you get that other piece off. And of course, the real test will be when you get the flowers put back in and a coat of paint on it. When do you think that's going to happen?
I am hoping within the next week. I may be... I'd like to avoid this if possible. I may have to actually install this Capital before I install the flowers, but I'm at least going to locate them, and I'm going to be boring out anywhere that needs to be bored out so that if I have to put them in on site, that it will be easy to do.
I noticed that the blocks that you put in seem to, I don't know what, get engaged in what was once the hole.
Sure, this one not as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that was unavoidable, huh?
Well, you know, talking to an expert after I installed these patches, I found that I probably could have dry fit it first and then at least shaved some of this out ahead of time, which would probably make the task a little bit easier. I think at this point, again, listening to this expert that I spoke with, if I have to insert a wedge of wood in there and then set up a jig which will allow me to accurately drill, then that's going to be a possibility. So whatever happens, I'll be able to make it work, you know. This sort of detail is less daunting than much of the project, so.
And once the flower's installed, actually,
Yeah.
we won't see much of that area around that hole, will we?
You won't see basically any of it. No. Nope. The flower comes all the way down to this point. Yeah, I've got some broken flowers here. The others are at home. I carved a second one the other night, so.
Cool.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't think I have any examples right now, but yeah, the flowers cover a fair amount of this area.
all right. Well, I can't wait to see that. Good luck.
All right, thanks.
All right, time to trim those things.
Yep. Gonna just do a rough line here. That looks good enough to me. And gonna stand on this side. There we go.
Very good.
And
This is-
then with this profile, I should be able to just use a straight chisel and be able to work, you know, follow that profile around when I'm carving it.
that's great. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.